Hi everyone, it's Kurt here again. Time for another video in our testing and evaluation in English course. Today I'm going to be talking about Chapter 9, Assessing Writing. As always, our content comes from our textbook by Brown and Abby Wickrama on language assessment. All right, let's jump in. So this is the fourth one, the fourth skill, and I'm not going to go over the learning objectives again because they're the same for every skill. So you can review those in your textbook. So let's start. Let's first look at just assessing writing in general, because one thing we have to consider when we're looking at writing is that what we expect our students to do is to follow these presupposed ideals about writing, how to write, and what makes a good writer. And this is true for everyone. Doesn't matter what language you're learning. As a native speaker, you have to learn how to write in your own language. But even in your own language, a lot of people actually don't learn how to write effectively using well-developed logical output and that achieves the intended purpose. You think about friends who write you messages. Sometimes they're so vague and you can't understand what they're talking about. This is a real life skill. Now, what's really hard about teaching English is that we expect our learners to follow these same writing conventions, even though they're doing it in a foreign language. And that makes it really difficult. If they're unable to write effectively in their own language, then how can we expect them to do it in English? So this can be a long, arduous process. So in terms of teaching it, it's really important that, first of all, it's not ignored. It's very important that writing is a part of the curriculum. But also, you have to really think about what's the purpose and what you're doing, depending on the level that the students are at. Okay, so let's jump in. When you're assessing writing, it needs to be clear what construct you're actually assessing. So is it their handwriting, their spelling? Are you looking to assess a grammatically correct sentence, paragraph construction, or the logical development of a main idea? It doesn't matter, they're all part of writing, but you have to know for sure what it is you're doing, and your students also need to know. Another point to know about assessing writing is that it's virtually impossible to isolate writing from the other skills. Think about it. When you write something down, after you write it, what do you usually do? You go back and read it. And now reading is automatically embedded in writing. And typically we have reading prompts, and it could be listening as well. It's really hard to isolate it. So we always assume that it will be integrated with at least one more skill. Okay, as always, let's quickly look at some different genres. I'm not going to read each specific one, just the headings. So we have academic writing, we have job-related writing, and we have personal writing, in which there are almost an unlimited different types that you can ask your students to do, depending on what level they're at and what they need to learn. Okay, so as always, we have our performance types. For writing, it's 4 as well. The first is imitative. So these are basic tasks of writing letters, words, punctuation, and very short sentences. It could be the ability to spell correctly. Maybe you're asking students to perceive phoneme-grapheme connections in English. Basically, at this stage, learners are trying to master the mechanics of writing. The form is the main or only focus. You're not asking them to write focused on meaning, which is kind of the opposite of what I said in speaking. At early stages, sometimes you will want students to focus on meaning. That can help their fluency, and accuracy isn't as important at the beginning sometimes, but it's different here. At the very basic level, they need to master the mechanics. Okay, the second is intensive or controlled. Here students are producing appropriate vocabulary within a context. Here we're looking at collocations and idioms, correct grammatical features up to the sentence level only. And again, the focus here is mainly on form. We have minimal focus on context and meaning. This is where we're looking at grammar, right? remember I mentioned before that for each skill, we're going to assess grammar because grammar is a main part of every type of output that we give. Writing is the same. So these type are usually focused at the syntactic level. Okay, then we move on to more challenging. So the third one is responsive. Here we're connecting sentences into paragraphs, creating logically connected sequences of paragraphs. So from the first to the second to the third, probably no more than 3. Tasks relate to pedagogical directives. So basically students get a list of criteria or an outline or some kind of directive and they have to respond to it. So these include narratives, descriptions, short reports, lab reports, summaries, short responses to reading, and interpretations of graphs and charts. Actually, responsive and extensive, it may be a little bit difficult to distinguish between the two, but in essence, responsive won't be as long as extensive. Okay, writers at this stage begin to have more freedom of expression. So this is the first time when students are being assessed that they have some creative license, which means in the first 2 type that I showed, at this point, the output is controlled by the test giver. The questions that you ask usually will only have one or not a very limited amounts of correct answers. So for spelling, of course, there's only one way to spell the word. And even in grammar reconstruction, usually the teacher will control the type of output. Once we get to responsive, it's different. Students are now able to maybe come up with their own creative responses. So here, there's more emphasis on context and meaning. The focus on form is only at the discourse level. Okay, then we have extensive. So once they get to the extensive stage, now we're looking at the entire process of writing. So students need to have successful management of all processes and strategies of writing. So these include essays, term papers, major research projects, theses, dissertations, and the like. So right now in Taiwan, I will consider high school, maybe most students aren't here yet, maybe a short essay, but I think even more than 3 paragraphs may be pushing it for the average student. But it's possible. Hopefully we get there. So there should be a focus on achieving a purpose here, organizing, developing ideas logically, using details to support ideas, demonstrating lexical and syntactic variety, and engaging in the process of writing. So now we're not focused on form, I shouldn't say at all. Focus on form comes at the end. The main goal is fulfilling the function or the purpose of the writing. So for example, if I'm writing a compare and contrast essay, my goal is to successfully compare and contrast the topic. Of course, later on, I will edit and proofread, and then I will focus on form. But that is the last thing I will focus on. In the beginning, it's all on meaning. Okay, so here are our micro skills for writing as always, and then the macro skills. Okay, so you can go through those on your own. So let's get into designing assessment tasks. So we'll start with imitative writing. Again, there are quite a few examples here. These are tasks in handwriting, letters, words, and punctuation. And the one thing I want to point out though is that the skill of handwriting, it's possible that this could become obsolete in the future. As most people today, I mean, take a look at all of you in class. Most of you are using your iPads. Now, I know some of you have an Apple Pen, so actually, technically, you're still writing. But a lot of kids today, they type. And I mean, I typed everything here. I still write because I'm old, so I like the feeling of putting words on paper. For whatever reason, my brain works better that way because that's how I learned to critically think, is to get my paper and my pencil and start writing. But that could go away. So these type of tasks, I don't know how authentic they'll be in the future, but for now, we still teach our students to write in the classroom. Okay, so saying that, the first example we have is copying. This is something we will do at the very, very basic level in elementary school, where test takers will read, copy the following words in the spaces given. But again, as I mentioned in a previous video, if students are at this level, they probably cannot read the prompt and they will have to be given it orally from the teacher. But basically, you just copy exactly what you see. So you look here, what we're differentiating between is small and big letters, and also the question mark and the exclamation mark. And you see we got some vowels, right? So it's kind of minimal pair here. We got I, E, and A. Do they know the difference? And other features that you will be focused on here are like the small letter B and the small letter D. Do they have it the right way? A lot of students get those mixed up and things like that. Also teaching them tall letters versus short letters, like the small L goes all the way up to the top line. The small E only goes to the middle line. These are the mechanics of actually writing English letters, and it's really hard for students in the beginning. Don't go below the line, but make sure the letter actually is on the line. No floating in space. Make sure the small p goes down underneath, not on top. There's so many of these features that you have to teach your students at the very basic level. Hopefully when they get to you in junior and senior high school, they will have gotten this mastered, but don't count on it. You will still have some students who may not be able to do this properly. Okay, the next one is listening close selection tasks. So we talked about close previously. Here we'll combine dictation with a written script using a frequent deletion ratio. Sorry, not ration, ratio. Remember that means how many words we delete. So here you would delete maybe every fourth or fifth word. And the test sheet will provide a word bank for students to refer to, because we're not testing their spelling. We're just getting them to practice writing the words. They hear the word, they write it down. If you want to make it more challenging, of course, you could add spelling to it. So here's an example. Test takers will here write the missing word in each blank. Below the story is a list of words to choose from. And then here's the story that they listen to. Have you ever visited San Francisco? It's a very nice city. It is cool in the summer and warm in the winter. I like the cable cars and bridges. What they see are the words below. The story has all those blanks in it, and then the words are provided below. So as they hear them, they write them down. Okay, so remember at the beginning I said you have to know the construct that you are assessing. Here it's not spelling, it's just handwriting, making sure that they can write the words that they hear. Okay, the next is picture cue tasks. So the students will be given some familiar picture, and then they write the word represented in the picture. So you see a picture of a cat, you write cat. And again, if it's not about spelling, then you can provide all the words there for them to choose. Why this one's a little bit different is now there's no listening involved and minimal reading, because they're just reading the words that they're writing down. Or you could do something like a form completion task where students get a form and it's a simple one asking for some information, like write your name, write your address, write your phone number, things like that. Address, I will argue, is a challenging one because most students in Taiwan will not know how to write their address in English, but you could give them other types of information. What grade are you in? Things like that. Okay, the next are tasks in converting numbers and abbreviations to words. Now, I will argue that converting numbers into words is very inauthentic, because it's rare that we will write these words out it's rare that we will write the numbers using words. Like when I write 9 o'clock, usually I don't write that out N-I-N-E-O apostrophe, right? We usually write it in number form. So this is more of a spelling type of task, in my opinion. If you want to test their ability to write the numbers, maybe you can just give them a spelling test. But anyways, you have to think about what you're asking them to do. However, writing abbreviations and then writing out the full word, this is more authentic. This is something we typically do. As it says on the screen, this is more of a reading task, and you have to really specify what the objective is. So the example is there. They hear, fill in the blanks with words, and then they see this and they have to write everything out with words. And another really challenging thing about this is the punctuation. Students not really sure where commas go, where periods go. So it could be a helpful task, but I think it will be quite challenging as well. You would need to practice this kind of thing in class a lot. Okay, next are spelling tasks and detecting phoneme grapheme correspondences. So we're still in imitative writing. Okay, so the first is spelling. Of course, everyone knows what a spelling test is. Just a couple notes I would like to make about spelling if you use it. So first you will dictate the word one at a time, and then use the word in a sentence and repeat your sentence. And you do this because you want students to know for sure what the word is. There's two things here. First of all, they might not catch the word. When you say words out of context, they're hard to understand. Like if I say bet, did I say bed? Did I say bet? Did I say bat? Did I say but? It could be any of those words, especially if your pronunciation is just a little bit different than what they're used to. So that could be an issue. Or if I say the word sea, what sea is it? Is it sea or the ocean? So a lot of teachers that I've seen in Taiwan, what they'll do is they'll give the Chinese definition as well. But I strongly suggest that you don't do this because you're not really helping your students in English now. You're having them rely on the Chinese definition. And for spelling, I think they should know in context what the word means. So it should be like this. Sea. I like to swim in the sea. I like to swim in the sea. Like that. And then students get to practice their listening and spelling at the same time. Unless your focus is translation, you're practicing translation, but then that might not necessarily be a spelling test. Okay, the next one is picture cued. Again, we got picture cued for almost every type of performance. So pictures are displayed with the purpose of focusing on familiar words where the spelling might be unpredictable. So, we can focus on word pairs like boot and book and read, things like that. But basically, now it's about spelling. In the previous one, it was just about writing the words out. So probably now you won't provide them with the word. Okay, the next are multiple choice techniques. So you can actually use multiple choice for spelling, but I could argue that it becomes a reading test. So at least at the very minimum, you should have them write the word, not just circle it. So in the sentence below, he washed his hands with, they can't just circle A. They need to write SOAP on the line. At least there's some washback there because they've chosen the word and they've written it down. Maybe that will help them to learn it and cement it in their long-term memory. Okay, so the next one is matching phonetic symbols. Now, this one I'm not so sold on, but the textbook shows it, so I'm going to talk about it. So here you will spell the word out with the phonetic symbols, whichever style that you teach them. So that's the first controversial point. Like in Taiwan, they may teach KK phonics, and then other schools may use like an American phonics system. And then some may use the IPA phonetic symbols. So that's the first complication, is which style are you going to use? I can tell you, and maybe you already know this, that KK phonics has its own issues, where some of the symbols don't make exactly the right distinction between sounds. And my opinion is a lot of schools, like some cram schools such as Joy English, for example, I know them, I'm not picking on them, but I know they do it because I worked there many years ago. And they teach students to read using KK symbols. And for me, this is a problem because once you take the symbols away, they're still not sure how to read the words, and students rely on those symbols. Secondly, it's not very authentic. That's not the way we read. We read by reading the words, and then when we get stuck on something we don't know how to pronounce, we can look it up or we can guess. Okay. But if your students are trained in this, it's kind of interesting in that, you look at this teach, Oh, okay, so I write teacher. Of course, these words are not here, right? These are just for us to look at. And then what makes this useful is, for example, this one is probably going to be CH. Most ch sounds are CH, but here is A. A can be written in a number of ways in English. And so you're still focused on the spelling, right? Now, I may argue that, okay, well, A could be AY. It could be at the end of words, it's usually AY. Let's see if I can find a better example. Okay, like cat. How about cat? It's not always A, right? With A sound is not always A. But for me, it's just confusing to the students. Why not just teach them how to spell cat instead of relying on these symbols? So I don't know. Some people like it, some don't. I'm not going to spend more time talking about this. But this is one way that you can do. Okay, so now we're moving on to intensive or controlled writing. Now, controlled writing is also called display writing. If you remember before, I talked about display questions. This is when you're not offering any new information. So no new information is passed on. Writing is the same. Okay, so here's some examples. This is the grammar level that we're focused on here. We can do dictation or dictocomp. Now, we did dictation already in listening, but since they're writing down what they hear, we could still call this a writing assessment. But here, the focus would be on correct spelling and punctuation, not necessarily on getting the right meaning, if that makes sense. And then dictocomp. Dictocomp is when you read a paragraph a few times and then the teacher takes it away and you try to rewrite it the best you can from memory. So probably it wouldn't be a paragraph. At least it would be a short paragraph. But the focus, again, is going to be on grammar. This one's more challenging, I think, for this level. Okay, then we have grammatical transformation tasks. I'm sure you've seen these a lot. Language teachers like them to assess grammatical competence. So here's a number of examples. You can read through them on your own, but these have no meaningful value. It's all about grammar. So this is a chance for teachers to assess whether students are able to focus on the grammar and do it in an accurate way. So these type of tasks are practical because they're easy to assess and design. It doesn't take very much time, right? You can just take a text and ask them to change things. And scoring should be reliable as well because there's only one correct answer. And since the focus is on the grammar, the content and face validity are also good, and construct validity as well, because we are really tapping into their grammatical knowledge. Okay, we have picture cued tasks again. This type, again, it limits the amount of reading that we need. This one is called picture cued sentence writing. So we have short sentences. So test takers will read these simple questions and then they have to write the simple answers. So number one, what is the woman doing? She's eating, or she's eating her dinner, or she's holding a spoon. Something that is correct about the picture. Now, really it's about the form, because what is the woman doing? So we're assessing the tense here, right? Same with number two, what is the man doing? He's waking up, he's getting up. Number three, what is the boy doing? He's watching TV, he's taking a break. Something that matches. So even though meaning is in there a little bit, the assessment is going to be on the grammar. Okay, the next one is picture description. So students respond to the picture shown with the correct form asked for. If you remember, in a couple chapters ago, there was a picture of like a living room, and there was a table and a cat and a book, and the focus was on prepositions like on, of, or, all of those. And so you can do the same thing. You can have students make 4 sentences using the preposition on, of, or correctly, and then you give them some words to help. Okay, you could also do picture sequence description. So you have 3 to 6 pictures. They're in a storyline, and that is the stimulus. And then the students need to make simple sentences based on the pictures. Now, if you're going to use this type, the pictures have to be simple and unambiguous. It has to be very clear what they're doing in the picture because it's making a story. Okay, and then you see the prompt below, describe the man's morning routine in 6 sentences. So here is a little bit more context plus syntax, because you have to know what he's doing and you have to get the grammar correct, because this will be the simple present, right? His routine. So they have to make sure about the third person singular, as well as they have to know what it is he's doing at the same time. So actually you're going to have to score 2 different things here. So in this type, we know that a control task, it allows a little bit of variation in the output, right? Because if I go back to the first one, he gets up, he wakes up, something like that. I can change a little bit. He takes a shower, he gets cleaned up, he gets dressed, he gets ready for work. There's a lot of different words I can use here. Well, not a lot, but a few. So you need to have a rating scale because there is variation. So here's a recommended one from the book. So it's just a very simple scale. 2 when it's grammatically and lexically correct. So they got the right action and the right grammar. Number 1, one of them is incorrect, but not both. And then 0 means they're both incorrect. You got the vocabulary wrong, the grammar's wrong, you get a 0. So have a look at the sentences below. So here are responses for the first picture. That's this one right here. Okay, so we got he gets up at 7, he get up at 7, he's getting up at 7, he wakes 7 o'clock. The man is arise at 7, he sleeps at 7 o'clock, sleeps on morning. And number 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, he sleeps at 7 o'clock, should have a period. That's my mistake, not the student's mistake. Okay, so if you were using this scale, then of course the first one will get 2 points, right? Because it's both grammatically and lexically correct. Then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 would all get 1 point because they all have one mistake, which is, well, look at this. He get up, so he gets up. Okay, grammar. He is getting up. Okay, it's the wrong tense. He wakes 7 o'clock. He wakes up. The man is arise, so it could be arises. And then he sleeps. No, he wakes up, not sleeps. So this one is lexically incorrect. And then the last one, sleeps on morning. Grammar, vocabulary, both wrong. So that one would be 0. Okay, then we have vocabulary assessment tasks. So this one, major techniques are defining and using a word in a sentence when we want to assess vocabulary. So 2 different ways to do it. So here are some examples that they provide for us. Number 1, write 2 sentences, A and B. In each sentence, use the 2 words given. Okay, so you have to put them together. So here you have to know what the word means and you have to be able to use it in a sentence. So this one's a little bit more challenging. Number 2, write 3 words that can fill in the blank. And then number 3, write the correct ending for the word. So here it's more about the form. Okay, so meaning and form together. Okay, then we also have ordering tasks. So reorder the words in a sentence. You've seen these ones probably a million times in your own learning. The test takers read, put the words below into a possible order to make a grammatical sentence. So you see cold, winter is, weather, the, in, the, and so on. And then the test takers have to write the correct answer. Okay. So you can see number 1 and number 3, actually there's more than one correct answer. So this type of task, it can be challenging for those students whose learning style isn't a logical or mathematical style. Like for me, I love this type of item because I love to organize and put things in the correct order. Some may say I even have a little bit of OCD because I like things to be in the right order. But other students may not think this way. They might be a little bit more creative, a little bit more thinking outside of the box, and it could be hard for them. So it's not really about writing now, it's about learning style. Second, sometimes just the way you order those words can totally confuse the students. which is why when you teach students how to do these ones, you should tell them to start writing the words around in different orders, and then it might just pop into their head just based on one switch. But you can use this type for controlled writing if you meet the following 3 criteria. The sentences need to be kept simple, no more than 4 or 5 words. Once you start to get too long, it becomes very challenging. It should be that only one possible sentence can emerge, and you have to practice it in class before. It can't be something new. Okay, another type of intensive writing is short answer and sentence completion tasks. These are called limited response writing tasks. Remember, at this level, we still only want a 1 sentence answer. So test takers see, so you can see number 1, it's a conversation. They have to fill in the gaps. And number 2 is the same, making questions and answering questions. And then number 3, restate the following sentences in your own words using the underlined words. So now it's a grammatical change. I never miss a day of school. I always miss school. So, of course, I have to change it a little bit, right? Okay, number 4, you're in the kitchen helping your roommate cook. You need to ask questions about quantities. Ask a question using how much. So you see they're very, very specific here. So it's still controlled by the test giver for the output, even though there's a little bit of creativity for the student. You need to say how much, and that is for item A. And then you need to say how many for item B, and then they give you some examples. It says like, so you can come up with your own words if you want. So how many, and you can see we're testing the grammar, how much and how many between countable and non-countable or uncountable nouns. Okay, and then number 5, look at the schedule of Roberto's week. Write 2 sentences describing what Roberto does using the words before and after. Okay, again, before is A, after is B. It's very clear for the students once they look at the picture of his schedule. Okay, and then number 6. And then the last one is write 3 sentences describing your preferences. A big, expensive car or a small, cheap car for A, a house in the country or an apartment in the city for B, money or good health in C. And so students, of course, have to write, I prefer an expensive car over a small, cheap car, or whatever the form is that they're working on. I prefer a big, expensive car to a small, cheap car, whatever way that the teacher taught them. Okay, so now we're going to move on to responsive and extensive. And for this book, for this subject, the author has actually combined them together because, as I mentioned, the only difference really is that you are the length of it, right? Extensive would be much longer, because extensive writing is usually responsive as well. You're responding to some kind of task. Okay, so first we have some issues that we need to consider. First of all, this is where the teacher takes away the control, and test takers are allowed to use creativity in their responses. The scoring criteria should focus on discourse and rhetorical conventions of paragraph structure and connected paragraphs. So now it's more about the process of writing. We're not focused on grammar anymore. Okay, the learner is responsible for accomplishing a purpose, developing a sequence of connected ideas, and empathizing with an audience. This is called real writing now, not display writing. And now here comes the major challenge, is that a foreign language learner needs to meet all the rules of writing just like a native speaker does. The only thing that we would expect to be not as strong is maybe the actual language use, because as a foreign language learner, of course, you're not as strong as a native speaker in using the language, but the skills of organization, connected ideas, we expect it to be the same. Okay. So responsive and extensive writing have the following assessment issues that we need to consider. The first is authenticity. So in this type of writing response or writing task type, students are performing more authentic writing, right? And here, as a teacher, you are now more of a coach or a facilitator. You're not teaching all the time. And assessment should be mostly formative, and positive washback here is more important than practicality or reliability. I hate to break it to you, but it's impossible to have your students do real writing and say that it's practical, because it takes so much time to read and assess and discuss and give feedback. You have to, it's just that way. If you want to have beneficial washback for your students, it's just part of the job. The second one is scoring. So the function of the text is as or more important than the form. And I will argue that the function is more important than the form, unless the form is really bad. Okay, and the third one is time. So typically when you ask students to write this style of writing, all of a sudden the language producer is not necessarily under time duress. Of course, you make your own time pressure, but in reality, you are allowed to use as much time as you need. You have more freedom to plan, compose multiple drafts, because here the drafting process is essential. It's all about planning, editing, proofreading, brainstorming, writing, and then fixing it. It's just so much more involved. So there's a question here when we give these large scale standardized tests that have a time limit. You have to ask yourself, is that really appropriate to assess a student's ability to write? Can you really replicate what you would be able to do under a normal condition where you can take many days to compose? Okay, but anyways, let's get to designing assessment tasks for responsive and extensive writing. So the first type you can do is paraphrase. As you know, paraphrase means to take a text and rewrite it using your own words, but keeping the meaning and the tone the same. And this is a very important but difficult concept for learners to grasp, because first of all, you have to teach students they're not allowed to copy. That's plagiarism. So we teach them how to paraphrase. Now, when you score something like this, it's really up to you how you do it, whether you want to even give a score or just give feedback, if you want to do holistic or analytic. But it's important that the original meaning and tone are the same. Okay, the second type you can do is guided answer and question. But it's important to know that this is typically not how you will test somebody's writing. You will use this to help them prepare to write a longer essay or something like that. That's why it's called guided writing stimuli. So maybe this could be appropriate in a literature course where the professor or the teacher has you read a story and wants you to write some kind of review or just a report, like a book report or something like that. So you can see the 7 questions all have some kind of purpose that's getting the writer to brainstorm and stimulate the thinking process. So we got setting, characters, sequence of events, reasons, causes, opinion, climax, evaluation. So everything involved in a story. Now, when you have students do something like this, it could be like 2 or 3 paragraphs long. You can score it if you want. But as I mentioned, it's not likely on a formal test, this type. It's usually a prompt. It's usually used to prompt initial drafts, which later can be edited and revised. When you write an essay, you won't write it based on 7 questions, but you can use those 7 questions to get all the information you need to write your essay. So basically, it's an outline that's used to help guide the student to logically develop their ideas. Okay, the next is paragraph construction tasks. So you have to ask yourself, what is involved when students are constructing paragraphs? And actually, this is also a very important skill that students need extra practice on. So as I mentioned here, writing is the art of emulating what you read, right? You want to be able to write something that looks like the same type of writing that you've read from others. Now, when you assess a student's paragraph development, there's a couple different forms that you should be looking at. The first is topic sentence writing. So the criteria could be specifying the writing of a topic sentence, scoring points for its presence or absence. Now, it should be mentioned that it's not 100% necessary that all essays, all paragraphs have a topic sentence, but It is something that we use when we're teaching students, especially when you're writing more nonfiction type reports or essays, that using the first sentence, topic sentence, it helps the reader to understand what the points are you're making. But you need to clarify and specify whether you want students to do that or not. And scoring or commenting on its effectiveness in stating the topic. It's not always easy to write a good topic sentence. Okay, then you can assess the topic development within a paragraph. So the clarity of expression of ideas, the logic of the sequence and connections, the cohesiveness or unity of the paragraph, the overall effectiveness or impact of the paragraph as a whole. And then you can assess the development of main and supporting ideas across paragraphs, addressing the topic, the main idea, or the principal purpose, organizing, developing supporting ideas, using appropriate details to undergird supporting ideas, showing facility and fluency in the use of language, and demonstrating syntactic variety. So all of this is involved. And then, okay, so moving on, to the next one. The next thing you could assess in responsive and extensive writing, or the next type of output you could do, is strategic options. So remember, when you're writing, developing main and supporting ideas is the goal for a writer who's trying to create an effective text. So some strategies that should be encouraged and you can actually assess are as follows. So the first one is actually attending to the task. For example, maybe your teacher asks you to write a compare-contrast essay. So the assessment of the fulfillment of the task would be, did you successfully write a compare and contrast essay? Now this type, again, it could be an informal, informative assessment, or you could put it into your scoring rubric. Actually, I like to do this. If I have students write a description, I like to score their ability to use descriptive language. I usually put the task feature right into the scoring. Okay, and there's other ones there: problem solution, pro, con, cause, effect. Okay, the next one though could be attending to the genre. And I put some examples here. Like, for example, if you're having students do a summary of a reading or a lecture or a video, then you can assess directly, did they effectively capture the main supporting ideas? Did they maintain objectivity in reporting? Did they use their own words? Did they use quotations when appropriate? Did they get rid of irrelevant or marginal details? Did they conform to an expected length? And then you score them based on how well they were able to attend to the genre. Does it look like a summary of a reading? Does it look like a lab report? And when you teach students to write this way, usually you do something called genre analysis, which means you study what lab reports look like, and then you ask students to write one, something like that. Okay. So those are all the different types. The very last part now is talking about scoring methods for responsive and extensive. And as I mentioned before, typically we can use holistic or analytic, but there's a third one I'm going to talk about today as well. So holistic scoring, as we know, the rater assigns a single score. Each point on a holistic scale usually has a set of descriptors. So for example, you can see here what they mean. Okay, they have advantages and disadvantages. So for holistic, it's faster to evaluate. It has higher inter-rater reliability because you can, if more than one rater is writing, you can actually discuss with each other, and it's easier to change the scores and make them match each other. And if you're trained well, then your scores should be in the right range anyways. Scores represent standards, so it's easily interpreted. So if I get a 6, now I know that I have superior writing ability. Okay. And typically you can apply this scale across all disciplines, right? So if you look at this scale again, it doesn't matter if this is English or chemistry or science, I can say 6 means it's superior. So it's easy to carry across to different disciplines. However, disadvantages, as we know, one score masks the difference across the sub-skills within each score. So actually, if I look at 5, it may have some errors. Which ones? And what's the difference between superior and strong? And if I write a compare contrast and I get a 6, and then I write pros and cons and I get a 5, I'm not really sure what happened there, right? There's no diagnostic information. There's no washback. I don't know which part of my writing was bad. Was it my grammar? Was it my logic? There's no way to find that out. And the scale may not be the same for all genres either. It depends on what you're doing. And as I mentioned before, if you're going to use holistic scoring, you need a lot of experience and a lot of training. I'll give you a funny example. In my teaching methods course this semester, I'm also using a flipped classroom. But for them, every video I make, they have to do 150 word reflection on the video. They need to write down, and I give them a holistic score. Basically, they're scored on how well they really reflected on the material. And what I do is when I score it, I never look at the names. I just look at how much they wrote and how meaningful the content is. And most of the students get a score between 80 and 100. However, what's funny is I don't look at the names and I don't look at the previous score. I just read it and I score it, and then I look up their name, and then I go to the list. And almost every time, if I give the student an 88, last week he or she got an 88 or an 87. It's crazy because I've done it so many times that my brain has trained itself, even if I'm not in the same type of mood. But as I mentioned, that's more of an informal type of scoring. So you wouldn't want to do that for something that's more formal, like a final exam or something. Okay, analytic scoring, as we know, we create different criteria within the final score. So very common ones would be like this. You have up to 6 different elements: content, organization, vocabulary, syntax, mechanics, something like that. Of course, you can adjust the scale to match your context. Ooh, too many mistakes here today. Context and or objectives. Okay, so advantages of analytic compared to holistic is that obviously they have more washback, but it has low practicality because it takes more time and it's harder to think about what you're doing, which makes it harder to read the essay holistically. You're typically reading and you break your reading into 6 different thoughts because you're thinking about the 6 different categories, where when you read it holistically, you're just reading for the quality of the essay. So sometimes you may have to read it more than once. That takes more time. Okay, the third type is called primary trait scoring. This focuses on how well students can write within the narrowly defined range of discourse. So what that means is it focuses on the task at hand and assigns a score based on the effectiveness of the text achieving its main goal. Now, in this type, scoring can be analytic and based on its effectiveness. So maybe the discourse and the syntax are included. So, for example, here are things you will look at for primary trait scoring: the accuracy of the account of the original. So if you ask your students to write a summary, how accurate was it? That's, instead of focusing on content and mechanics, it's on the function. Did they successfully do what they were supposed to do? And as I mentioned, I like to use this. I like to use a mixture between analytic and primary trait. The clarity of the steps of the procedure and the final result for a lab report, or the description of the main features of the graph for a graph description, or expression of the writer's opinion in response to the article. So you're not just focused on those 6 categories, but more on what it is they were supposed to do. Okay, now the last part is what called beyond scoring, responding to extensive writings. As a teacher, how do you respond to your students? And it shouldn't just be analytic or holistic scoring. You should be guiding them and giving them very strong washback to help them. So in research, it's been shown that the process approach to writing is probably one of the most effective ways to teach writing. Now that means going through the process, pre-writing, and then you draft your first copy, and then you get some feedback. Could be peer feedback, could be teacher feedback, could be both. But that feedback is usually on a specific part. Then you edit it and you write it again. And then you get feedback again. And then you compose a final draft. And then you get some feedback again and probably a score. In this type, there's less reliance from the teacher to lecture about good writing and focus on this type of form. And I think that's a mistake that happens even here at the university level, is a lot of teachers focus on the language used rather than the skill of writing itself. So, and I agree with this 100%. Students get better at writing by doing it and focusing on the process and getting feedback, not on focusing on the form anymore. It's time to focus on the global macro level. And assessment should come in different forms at different stages. So at the initial stages of the process of composing, so maybe you've composed your first draft. As a teacher, if you're giving feedback, you should focus your efforts mostly on meaning, main idea, and organization. Comment on their introduction because that sets up the whole essay. Make general comments about the clarity of the main idea, the logic, the appropriateness of organization. Typically, you want to ignore the minor errors in grammar and vocabulary because they might change them anyways when they edit. You're not focused on the small parts now, it's the global areas. Indicate what the major errors are by underlining them, but don't rewrite them for students and don't give them the answer. Allow them to make their own corrections. If you point it out and tell them exactly, then they're not going to learn as much as if they find out for themselves. If they have to, let them come to you and ask. Do not rewrite questionable, ungrammatical, or awkward sentences. Use a probing question about meaning. What does this mean? Is this question mean this? You know, like you probe with your questions and allow the student to think about it and realize that there's something wrong. And then comment on features that are irrelevant to the topic. Okay, last one. And then when you're giving feedback or responding to the later stages, so maybe this is after their second or their final draft, comment on the specific clarity and strength of all main ideas and supporting ideas and on their logic. Call attention to local errors, but again, let the writer self-correct. Don't correct it for them. And maybe not circle every single mistake in the essay. That will be too heartbreaking for them. Comment on word choices or expressions that could be improved. Point out any issues in cohesion. If necessary, comment on citations or lack thereof and evidence provided, and comment on the adequacy and strength of the conclusion. Okay, everybody, that's it. I know today was a long one. It was a long one for me too, but there's a lot of information here. Going forward, we're going to be focusing on grammar and vocabulary and then on actual scoring. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.